the first question I ask, and this is and I've decided it's the way I'm going to start every podcast. You got this email, and it was this long ass form you had to fill out. So there are two questions that I really have. One is, what do you think of the name Manufacturing Mavericks? Because I'm not completely sold. My wife thinks it's brilliant. This guy thought it was really great. He says, because to use the word maverick, I mean, maverick is not something you use all the time.
Mhm.
And so, one, I'm curious about what do you think of the name? And two, what prompted you to fill out this monster form? Like, well, when I fill out something and I get like 5 little line questions, I go, screw it, I'm not doing it. So, like, those are the two questions that I have to start this whole thing off.
Um, I mean, the word Mavericks is great, but to me, it indicates somebody who's already done something and has been doing it for a long time. You know, somebody who's incredibly seasoned. It doesn't talk about like the newness of technology and breaking the barriers, and that's the difference to me. So I'm not sure what the point or what your goal in the podcast is.
The
So I
goal
was
is, oh,
yeah,
okay,
like
sorry.
I would consider myself like a maverick in denim design and manufacturing, because I've been doing it for a long time and I've worked for a lot of big companies. But if it's about newness and technology, and I'm not that, you know what I mean? So that's what was one of my first question to you. Are you sure you want to talk to me?
I love talking to you. You know, but I'm trying to gauge the name, like,
Yeah.
because you talk about, Mavericks are trendsetters. They're people that go think outside of the box, the norm. I wanted to get manufacturing in there because it's a long name, but I
Yeah.
wanted to get manufacturing in there because I'm trying to get people to identify that it's about manufacturing. It's like, it's not as much technology. While technology is a part of it, it's like
Right.
in your case, for example, and then I'm going to tell you an even more interesting story. Remember, I told you about this woman in the UK?
Yes.
I had the podcast this morning with her, so that's another story that I
Okay.
will tell you shortly. But for you, you one, your your expertise in manufacturing. Two, you're a maverick in the historical sense of everything that you've done over your lifetime.
Right.
Um,
Thank you.
but my pleasure. But when it comes to innovation, you're a throwback because you're old school, and your your belief in success, in particular with the AMO brand, but basically your belief in success is the old school methodology that you're currently using. And you feel that brands that aren't made in LA, and the special sauce that LA delivers is one of the secrets to success. So
Correct.
I consider you, while you're innovative in the respect that you're almost anti-innovative, where you're using, because everybody believes that you really have to change things, you have to revolutionize things, and in your case, and it may be because it's denim, which is based on touch and feel, not innovating is a good thing. And which will
Maybe.
bring me full it'll bring me full circle to this morning. This woman that I met with this morning, when I read her profile, so to speak, or at least the way she filled out that big application, she sounded very much like what you were explaining about made in LA, hand, it's all hand, bringing something to someone, because what she does is she takes inspiration from vintage. She
Yeah.
actually makes bras, stockings, garters. She buys that 50s vintage stuff because apparently it fits differently, or I'm not exactly sure how that works, but she's recreated that 50s vintage feel. And it's all done by hand, same thing where she goes, she'll choose the fabric, it'll be sewn in-house. They have a small little factory in London or in somewhere in the outlying area, and that's where they manufacture. So she's very similar to you, is that she's a complete throwback to what was, and down to the commercials, the advertising, everything. And the thing that really interested me is it's so sexy. You know, when you think about everything that you see today and how little people are wearing,
Yeah.
um, there's just something that was so sexy about this old style, the bras of the 50s and the garters, and like I don't know. I
I
just
bet.
when I looked at it, it was just I was blown away by how attractive it is compared to, I think I was looking on one of my feeds this morning and it shows Demi Moore in like her and her daughter Rumor, like wearing like nothing. And I look at that and I'm going, not so much. But then you see
Right.
this corset and like it's just I don't know. There's just something about it. And maybe my age, maybe it's sort of that anti-fashion kind of or anti-nudity kind of thing that is
Right.
attractive. But it reminded me of you. It reminded me of you, that authenticity that you're bringing comparative to 3D. Like I still don't get it. I don't believe that you can do a three-dimensional garment and know the fit, know how everything is just based on a picture. I don't get it. I know drape, I know fabric, I know something as simple in denim, and I'm sure you've run into it, is the rise, front and back rise. The curve may be 21 inches, but the balance is everything. So
Right.
like, how do you see that in an image? And you only know that in fit. So sometimes authenticity, I think, is really important. So
I mean, I think definitely technology can be used a lot more in the apparel manufacturing process. But I think for things like lingerie, anything that fits that closely to the body, I think it's very, very difficult. I think for a woven blouse, I think it works. For certain types of fabrications, it works. But lingerie, swimwear, denim, I don't see how it works. Even a
yeah,
t-shirt, to be honest, like a well-fitted t-shirt.
yeah,
Um,
I don't agree. I don't think that 3D technology works. I have an issue with it. Um, so I want to ask you a question.
okay.
um, and I'm also told that I too much.
Okay.
The No, my wife was listening and she was like so proud. She was so happy to hear this because she thought it was like so smart, so so different than the norm. And she knows me. I'm like, I talk far too much, but she was actually impressed with this. So we, I know about you as an authentic now. The
Okay.
question comes down to the one that I was curious about how you were going to react is, again, the start to your career came how?
The start to my career, or how I started. Um, I guess I became very intrigued about making clothing at a very early age. I was at a friend's house and they were cutting out costumes on the kitchen floor. And I was just fascinated by watching them cut out the patterns and that they were going to sew them into costumes, with glittery fabrics and everything like that. And I was fascinated by it. And I used to watch the Carol Burnett show, and I loved all the costumes on the Carol Burnett show. And I got a book called Dressing for Glamour, by Bob Mackie, and I sort of thought it would be great to be a costume designer and just make costumes. And then when I was in my teens, I got into a lot of trouble.
Now,
And
now you realize that's a conversation that I want to have offline.
I was a curious individual and I
Uh,
explored things that I shouldn't have been exploring. And my parents were kind of strict. So I spent a lot of vacations and summers at home. And I was, interested in fashion and I liked sewing. So I kind of taught myself how to sew. I taught myself how to sew when I was younger. I started making doll clothes, and then I just, I kind of fell in love with the craftsmanship of clothing. And when I got out of high school, I said I wanted to go to design school. And my parents said, that's not a real job. And I was just stubborn enough to say, I don't care. And I figured out a way to do it on my own. And it's been it's been amazing for me, because I love the craftsmanship of clothing. And when I kind of fell into denim for the first time, I worked for a lot of small brands for about 10 years. I did work as a costumer actually for a short time. That was my very first job. And I did get to work at Bob Mackey's studio, funny enough, but that's a whole other story. Um, but I,
you realize there's follow-ups to all of this, right?
um, when I ended up at Levi and I discovered denim, and I really, really fell in love with the craftsmanship of clothing. And that was like the first place that was really about craftsmanship and making something quality. And and there was a history and an authenticity, and it came from somewhere real, and you weren't just randomly designing something. Everything had a purpose and a function. And that's kind of when everything sort of opened up to me, and I really, um, you know, really kind of fell in love with the apparel industry.
Uh, and I, from my experience, I also share that love of denim.
Yeah,
Strangely
great.
enough, I haven't worn, like I said, I spent 25 years making denim. We
Uh-huh.
did, we were key suppliers to Harley Davidson and Timberland and Volcom and Billabong and Quicksilver. There's actually, the story still circulates in Quebec City. We were launching the ladies stretch denim,
Mhm.
and they flew the Harley, and our factory was about 2 hours outside of Montreal, because Quebec has this history of the women all worked in little sewing factories and the men worked in the fields or wherever. It was like, it's a really interesting thing because Quebec is bigger than Texas is. And they have all these little villages around. And Harley Davidson was launching their denim line. They flew the Harley jet into this little hobby airport in the middle of a snowstorm.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, so they toured the factory and they saw that, okay, we were on schedule. This the jet just barely made takeoff into, like, you know, those commercials where you
Oh, because
kind of
the
you see the
runway
jet.
was too short.
It was a snowstorm, short
Oh,
runway on top of heading off into the lake. So literally, if you didn't make that takeoff at that point, you were dumping into an ice-filled lake. So that story is still one of the legends. But what I loved about denim, and for me, it was, I think, it started, like, the trend started late 90s. The real craftsmanship of denim, you know, because it used to be you had raw and, you know, you can go into selvage and stuff like that, where you had your different washes, but they were just really that. They were just a wash. And then I think it started sometime late 90s, where you got into, like, what I'll call effect, where you started hand sanding and you started painting and you started to do things with denim that were far above the norm. And then you had your Cone and your Swift, for example, that were making some really, really nice denim, you know, different yarns, different colors. So to me, it was always an art form. And that was what I loved about it. I was really good, if I can take any bit of positivity out of denim, I was really good at fabric and finish. That was kind of why we, especially when it came to, like, Stussy, Volcom, we were really Element. I remember working with Gabriel Tenberg over at Element. He was like the wash king, and there was just something about it that I loved. It was an art form to me. So I
it
have a
definitely is.
loaded question for you.
Yes.
And we'll try to put ego aside,
Okay.
because I love to pat people on the back.
Okay.
You have a strong story of history behind you.
Thank
And
you.
there are so many people in the industry. Why are you so special?
I don't know that I am so special.
Look, I don't take to that many people that often. And there's something special about you.
Oh, that's very nice.
Whether it is your authenticity, whether it is your humbleness, I'm not sure what it is, but with all of the people that I have dealt with, all of the designers that I've dealt with over the years, you are something special.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm really curious as to what makes you special.
What makes me special? I genuinely love what I'm doing. I do love the craftsmanship of making clothing. I do love the creative and collaborative environment of an apparel company. I've been doing this for a long time. As I mentioned, I'm getting ready to retire. I've been doing this for 40 years.
Don't leave us yet. Like, come on, you have to have a second act. Like,
this was my second act.
So you got to have a third then. I mean,
I know, it's my final act.
When we used to go to concerts, remember they'd leave the stage, they'd come back once, they'd leave the
An
stage,
encore.
they'd come back again. Like you, you can recreate yourself for like act three.
I mean, I won't say never, but you know, I genuinely just enjoy what I'm doing, and or I've always enjoyed what I was doing. Working was my hobby, fashion was my hobby, you know, and I'm super proud that I have survived um this this career, and I've been able to craft my career the way I wanted to and end it the way I end it the way I want.
Uh, okay, I'll accept that, and I won't press much further. Um, I I'm curious about something
Mhm,
because the industry in general can be brutal.
mhm,
You know, you're some of the owners and you know, between ego or success, I'm not sure if they go hand in hand or whatever the case may be. It's a really hard industry to
it
survive in,
is.
to keep your sanity.
It has been.
And is there something that has helped to make you, or not make you, but what character trait do you feel that you have that that has allowed you over all these years to work with some of the lunatics that do exist in the industry?
I think having a sense of humor has probably been the number one thing that has helped me survive. I also, believe it or not, I don't take it too seriously. We're not curing cancer, we're making pants. I mean, I've said that a million times. Um, and I work very hard while I'm at the office, but when I leave the office, I leave it at the office. I mean, maybe I wasn't so good at doing that when I was 25 and 30, but you know, at a certain point, I reached that. You know, there were a couple of times that I almost left the industry because I didn't want to be treated the way that I was being treated. I didn't want people yelling at me or throwing things at me or or grabbing me or being sexually harassed. I was just I did almost leave, and then I ended up at Levi, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a utopia. They're treating me like a normal person. And from that point on, I was much more cautious about where I worked. And, you know, and I stayed at places for much longer periods of time because they treated me well and I stayed.
Okay,
Yeah.
so since we are innovators, or in your case, anti-innovators, as
I'm
look,
not an anti-innovator. I just think that for the type of product that we're making at AMO, that this is the best direction to be going. If I were making a different type of product, if I worked at the Gap, I might have a different take on manufacturing.
but that's sort of the way that's what I mean by anti-innovate, is that you're going with tried and true, like they 20 years ago,
Hmm.
they're making they made denim the way you're making it now. In LA, carrying the pattern over, going to the
Correct.
sample room, sewing the sample. So that's what I mean by anti-innovative, is that
Yes.
while you utilize certain softwares, you per se don't really use that too much. I think you had
We do
mentioned
not.
somewhere along the line, yeah. And I think that the only thing that you had mentioned that made your life easier was working with WFX and being able to put a fabric in that's kind of, you didn't have to replicate in multiple locations.
Which we got 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. So, welcome to the 21st century. But at least it's been a positive experience, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And like I said, the reason I call it anti-innovative is because you're doing something now that the same way that was done 20 years ago. And there's something to say about that.
Right.
Because obviously there's a success to your history and to the company's history. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'll leave just one.
I don't believe that for a second. I think there's more than one question, which is completely fine.
And it's sort of the way I try to end these things because I do a guest lecturing at the University of Southern California, Pomona, on production, on basically using time reaction and how we do that. So I love teaching. To me, there's one, perhaps it's listening to the sound of my own voice. And two, it may be, and I believe this is the real cause of it, because I can talk to my dog and listen to the sound of my voice. It may be, oh, and that reminds me, she's still outside and it's pretty cold out there. She's an old dog to be out.
Do you want to go let her in?
No, it's fine. She'll only go and head out and want to go into the backyard. So she's fine. But from the educator perspective, and I'm not going to say talking to yourself 40 years ago, because that's hard, because we, as you and I know, we lived in different times. The 20-year-old of today is certainly not the 20-year-old of when we were 20.
Can you imagine?
Well, my wife and I talk about it all the time, is kids today do not realize what our lives were like. Like they cannot even begin to experience what we lived. Both the stuff that you can tell your children and the stuff that you can't tell your children. The life that the kids today live is like, I honestly feel bad for them because they're they're they live in this world of this kind of stuff, and like instant everything. And I mean, for us, it was like life was so simple. You went to school, you walked home at lunchtime, you had your, like, the streets were safe. Hitchhiking? Like, can you like honestly say that you would recommend to your child to go hitchhike across the country? Like,
probably not.
I don't even think there's a probably in there. It is like, now it's like, don't talk to strangers, don't like live, like it really is, the kids live a different life.
Even if your car was broken down in a snowstorm, you would still have to be leery of getting in a car with somebody. That's the sad part of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, and there are too many stories that we can probably even go into in any allotted time. And like I said, there's a lot that I'm really curious about about you that at some point we'll have another conversation about it. But from an educator perspective, what would you tell this naive 20-year-old just either coming out of a fashion technology school or going into one? What would you tell them to help them achieve getting to where you are in your life, where you're now about to retire? Happily.
That to do their research. No matter what they're going into, they're going on an interview or they're starting a new job. There's so much information out there. If you're going to talk to somebody, you should know everything about them. You should know, this is a business. All businesses they're about people. And the more you know about the person you're talking to, you're in a much better position. Because to know how to appeal to that person, or if you want to work at a company, the more information that you know, the better. Knowledge is power, and it's out there. And if you walk into an interview without knowing it, you're foolish.